Hey everybody, I'm Zoe.
And I'm Chandi.
And this is Bound by the Cloak.
The Gullah Geechee people have a rich and powerful heritage, deeply rooted in the Lowcountry of South Carolina and the coastal communities of the southeastern United States. Their language, traditions, and way of life have been preserved for centuries, carrying the legacy of their West African ancestors.
But how much do we really know about this culture beyond the surface? And what challenges does it face today? We're joined by Luana Graves Sellars, writer, historian, and a passionate advocate for Gullah Geechee preservation. She's dedicated her work to documenting their history and fighting to protect their future. Hi, Luana. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How you doing?
Pretty good. Can't complain. So could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, just so our listeners know?
Yeah, absolutely. So I consider myself a Gullah preservationist, and a Gullah cultural preservationist is actually a little bit more accurate to how I describe myself. And I describe myself that way because I am focused on my culture, which is the Gullah Geechee culture, and preserving it in the sense of not so that the culture can be put in a museum and it's on a shelf somewhere, but as in documenting the culture and making sure that people are not only aware of the culture, but they're also able to hold on to the stories and the traditions and information that the elders have. And so that's the preservation part, because our elders are leaving us, but a cultural preservationist and influencer.
And how would you define Gullah to someone who's not familiar?
So the Gullah Geechee are the direct descendants of West African enslaved people who were specifically brought to the Sea Islands from North Carolina to Florida because they were highly skilled and proficient in growing rice. And West Africa is considered the rice coast of Africa. So it's something that they've been doing there for generations.
Regionally, historically, North Carolina to Florida. But what are some places that would be hubs for Gullah Geechee culture?
Well, there are communities that span from just south of Wilmington, North Carolina, all the way down to St. Augustine, Florida, and along the coastline. And the area is federally designated as the Gullah Geechee Corridor. And so federally, they say it goes to about 40 miles inland, but the culture can be found anywhere. For instance, the language itself has been found as far south as Key West.
What's it like to walk the land and see these plantations that you know your ancestors have lived and worked on? And what kind of feelings do you have around that?
Oh my gosh, what a fabulous question that no one has ever asked me before, but I'm so excited to answer. So the first time that I was going to a former plantation, first of all, well, it was Brook Green Gardens in Georgetown, South Carolina. That was probably the first plantation. And I didn't realize that the place where I was actually the land that my ancestors were enslaved on. And so that in itself, when I realized it, was incredibly powerful. And it was very emotional. My daughter was there. My mother was there with me. And this was, maybe 3, almost 4 years ago. But it is still something that we're processing. And what bothers me about plantations, because since then I've been fortunate to actually spend the night on a couple of plantations as well as visit other plantations. And what bothers me is that some of them are not honoring the experience that people have had there. For instance, someone getting married on a plantation where there's blood in the soil. I mean, that just boils my blood because it's not a joyful place to celebrate. It is a place to be revered and respected. And so for me, going to a plantation and spending time on the plantation and being able to just be and experience and get a greater understanding of what my ancestors went through, that's vitally important to me. And I absolutely encourage anyone to do it.
Yeah, I myself have never been to a former plantation, never had the chance to explore those places. And I've had family who's gone, but I would love to go and just be in the space and kind of get a feel for the history and, what happened, in the past.
Just to follow up with that, it's funny, before we even started this conversation, I was on Instagram and I came across a post that was highlighting or educating people on the 7 ports of West Africa that most enslaved people came through. And what I realized is that of those 7, I've already gone to 3, but I'm going to make it my business to go to all of them. Because until you go there and until you see what they experienced and how they were able to survive, it gives you a completely different perspective than reading it in a book or just seeing a picture.
I'm just curious of the ports that you went to.
Last August, July and August, I was able to go to Ghana. And so in Ghana, of the 7, I went to 3 of them in Ghana. One is the Elmina, and they call them slave castles. I call them slave dungeons because the Portuguese called it a castle, but it was the Elmina. There's also the Cape Coast, and then there's the Asso Mansa Slave River, which is where the last bath was. People were forced to take their last bath before they were either sold or put on a ship.
Those sound like really powerful experiences. Yeah, I think everybody should go and experience those places and what it's like. Because I think it would have a profound effect on many people. Things that you don't even think about. Obviously, it was a long time ago, but it's still important and it still means something to understand.
Absolutely. And it's relevant and it's tangible. You cannot, as much as I thought I knew with my degree in Black history and the work that I've done and all of that, I was not prepared to walk in those spaces. I was not prepared for, and it's funny because I feel the emotion now just saying this. I was not prepared for the visual aspects of being there and knowing that, like at the river, the DNA is in the soil. The DNA is in the water. I actually bought a bottle of water back. I don't know if you can do that on the plane or whatever, but I brought a bottle of water back with me from the river. And to be in the room I'm 5'8". I had to bend down to get into that. The entry is cramped. It's a dark room. There's no air. There's no windows. To be in the place where they literally, if you did something wrong or acted up or something like that, that's where they put you to die. They didn't feed you. They didn't give you anything. They just said, go in this room and die. And so, I mean, that's the kind of thing that me reading about it, it doesn't do it the justice, the kind of justice that it deserves. And every single Black American who is a descendant of an enslaved person, because we all are, they need to go and see for themselves. It gives you such a different perspective on everything.
Back to Gullah culture. What is unique about Gullah culture and how has it influenced American culture as a whole?
Oh my goodness, so many different ways. And that is one of the things that fuels my work, fuels my fire, that there are so many parts of Gullah culture that are woven into American society that we don't even recognize. There's so many things that we do, like one-pot meals, a lot of the children's stories, like Bugs Bunny, I believe was a derivative of Brer Rabbit, which were Gullah folk tales. The Kumbaya, which is the Girl Scout theme song, Kumbaya is Gullah for come by here. So, and Juliet Lowe, who was the founder of the Girl Scouts, she lived in Savannah surrounded by Gullah people. There's so many different things that we do and that we say. Like growing up, there was this peanuts covered chocolate candy called goobers. Well, goober is Gullah for peanut. Tote bag, jukebox, all of those are Gullah words. And so we're saying it and doing it every single day. We just don't give the Gullah culture the credit that it deserves for that association.
What's interesting about the word goober is when I was in summer camp as a kid, we would sing a song. It's a Civil War era song called Goober Peas, right? So it's really about like a soldier walking around eating goober peas. But I had no idea that the word goober was connected to Gullah language at all. So that's actually really fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And there's so many words, like the word Nana. There are millions of Nanas in the United States and around the world. Nana is a Gullah word, and it literally means someone of respect and someone you look up to. But it's also what a lot of royalty was called. The kings, their first name is Nana and then whatever. There are just so many different elements that come together with what we do and that came from over there.
And, when I was a kid, I would watch Nickelodeon and there was a show, Gullah Gullah Island. And that was, my first exposure to Gullah culture. And I feel like I remember some of it, but not much because obviously it's been a very long time. It was the 90s. But did you know about the show? Did it have any impact on the culture at all?
Absolutely. The show was done by Ron and Natalie Days, and I affectionately call Ron, one of the ambassadors of the culture, because it really brought the culture to the masses in a way that we needed. And a lot of people still remember it. And it was modeled after the culture and being an island-based culture. St. Helena is where Ron is from. So St. Helena Island, I should say, is where he is from and where he grew up. So the impact of it and the popularity of it is really something that kind of turned the tide for the culture, because the culture been around forever, since before the Civil War. But a lot of people, didn't know about the language or the culture and some of the different elements of it until Gullah Gullah Island came out and kind of made it a little bit more mainstream. I mean, I think there were two things that happened that really kind of elevated the culture. Gullah Gullah Island would be one of them. And then Dr. Lorenzo Turner, who was a linguist who identified Gullah as an actual language and culture and his research and all of that. And that was like in the 40s, 50s when he did that. So those were the two things that really elevated and put the culture more on the map. And now, of course, people are really elevating it a little higher based on the work that they're doing, sweetgrass baskets or telling the stories or interpreting the stories and things like that.
So let's get personal.
Oh, no.
What first sparked your passion for preserving and sharing more about Gullah culture?
So I grew up in New York on Long Island. My grandmother and her two sisters were born in Charleston. And growing up, my grandmother's sisters or my great aunts would always talk about the fact that they were Geechee and that they were proud Geechee, but they never said what that was. But I grew up with rice on the table, red rice, okra, was always there for Thanksgiving and big meals, so there were elements of the culture that I grew up with, but I never made the connection until I moved to South Carolina. And within the last less than 10 years, when I started to do the work on writing about the culture, did I realize that it was my own culture. And one of the things as a child that I always struggled with was the fact that I didn't believe or consider myself to be an African American, because, now I know DNA-wise exactly what countries I'm from. But as a child, I knew it was a continent, not a country, I don't come from every country in Africa. I just knew that didn't make any sense to me. And I didn't understand or relate to calling myself a Black American for the same thing. Black is a color. It's not a race. It's not like white people don't call themselves white Americans. So why are we calling ourselves Black Americans? Just didn't make any sense to me. The more work that I did and the more research that I did, I started to realize that I was identifying and connecting to my own culture. And so now I call myself a Gullah Geechee American because to me that makes sense. That fits. And I'm hoping that one day, it'll really be a thing that like I go in a government form and I can check off Gullah Geechee American. Going back to the whole going to plantations or the slave dungeons, it's tangible. I can come to the Gullah Geechee Corridor and my ancestors were here. They were enslaved here. And then I can go to West Africa and go to the countries that they were stolen from. So, that to me makes it real. And my wanting to learn about the culture, learning more about it, and really sharing the culture and educating other people and shouting it from the mountaintops that I'm Gullah Geechee American. I mean, that's very, very important to me.
What exactly is Gullah culture? I know it's a broad question, but, there's language involved. There's art, music, food, religion, storytelling, and other things as well.
It's all of those and then some. There is herbalism. There's the connection to nature and trees and the wild plants that grow all over the South that the ancestors knew if you had high blood pressure, you could take some Spanish moss, put it in your shoes, and that would reduce your blood pressure. Life everlasting, the plant, if you boiled it and you had a cold or fever, that would help you feel better. I mean, there were just so many things that they did and had the knowledge of and the experience to bring it. Because for the most part, if they were on the plantation, they may have been under an enslaver, but they were essentially on their own. There was no doctor who was going to stop by and give you a checkup or something. But they knew how to handle it themselves. They knew how to take care of themselves. And so between that and the language and using the language as a form of resistance so that they could communicate amongst themselves. A lot of enslavers felt that Gullah people were ignorant and they couldn't learn what we call proper English. Well, they chose not to speak proper English. They chose to speak amongst themselves and hold on to the traditions and the culture and the language that they had from Africa. So there's so many different aspects of the culture that are so important to hold on to, as well as maintain and share for future generations so that they can have that pride of knowing that they survived everything.
And what goes into preserving the culture? What are some of the challenges that you faced or that other historians and preservationists have faced?
Well, two. So the first one is that the culture is a face-to-face culture. We didn't have history books. We couldn't write down stories. So everything was passed down orally. And because of that, a lot of the elders who know the stories are dying off. And with them goes the stories. And for a lot of them, they really didn't want to and still don't want to talk about it because it was a painful experience for their family or whoever, it was. So that's one of the crisis things that the culture has. The other one is the fact that there are a lot of families who, before the Civil War ended and after the Civil War, they were able to acquire land, either land that was given to them by enslavers, or they just, through blood, sweat, and tears, were able to gather enough money and buy land. And so that land right now chances are, it is heirs property, which means it's been passed down from generation to generation without any documentation. And because of that status of it not having documentation, some of the land might have hundreds, if not thousands of heirs that are tied to that land. And so between resort development and tourism and the fact that Sea Island land is the most expensive in the country and desired, the land is being lost. And with the land, the land is the biggest asset that the culture has. So when the land is gone, that means families are broken up, communities are broken up, and then they're scattered wherever they go. Not to say that they won't hold on to the traditions, but the richness of the culture that is actually here in the Sea Islands, it just goes away. And so those are the two critical mass issues that the culture has. And we're fighting time. 90% of Black land loss in America is attributed to heirs property loss.
You mentioned tourism, the Sea Islands. So are there positives and negatives to tourism? And what are the implications of the tourism in that area?
Ouch. I'm one of those people, don't ask the questions if you don't want the answer. And truth be told, I'm as guilty as anyone else because I live on Hilton Head. I'm a Kamya. I have come here. I'm not a Binya, someone who has been here on the island as a Gullah. So I'm guilty. I'm totally guilty of this too. But tourism and development has truly changed the flavor of the communities that are here and essentially watered down the culture. And there are still people here, but because of rising taxes and other reasons, a lot of Gullah can't afford to stay. And so that's why they're being pushed out of the homelands that they've had in their families for generations. And when you can't afford to stay because someone built a huge McMansion next door, actually just give you an example of that. So through my foundation, which protects Gullah land, I was able to assist a 96-year-old woman who has been living there on her land all of her life. Her husband passed away and the property was in his name. When he passed away, the county automatically, because there was no documentation, no will, no nothing, the tax rate just jumps to the next rate level. And so for years, their taxes were $440. Because of development that came and was surrounding this house, when that happened, their taxes went from $440 a year to $2,200 a year. She's 96 and on a fixed income. She can't afford that. And that's why a lot of people get pushed out because you can't afford to do what you need to do to hold on to it.
The Gullah population in the coastal and lowcountry areas have changed a lot over the past few years. So what is that population like today? And in addition to being pushed out, people who do move out voluntarily, why do you think that happens?
So I'll give you an example on Hilton Head Island. So before the bridge to Hilton Head was built in 1956, the Gullah owned 3,500 acres. Part of what I do with my work is I literally count acres and keep track of it. Today, we're down to 936, and that was of a year ago. And so when that happens, little by little, and you asked me about tourism and things, sometimes, and again on Hilton Head, if you only have service industry jobs for restaurants and waiting tables and things like that, everybody doesn't want to do that. The majority of people don't want to do that. So a lot of the young people are leaving the island for better opportunities elsewhere because A, there might not be the kind of jobs that they want to do or can get, and B, they can't afford to live here. That's one of the big problems that we have. A lot of the people who have lived on here, some of them are being bused to the island, 2.5, almost 3-hour ride on a bus to come to work. That's a hard life. And of course, Hilton Head has the tourism needs for people to, to work. But if it's only service industry kind of positions, eventually riding on a bus for 2 hours is going to get old. And so that's part of the process of gentrification that a lot of the Sea Island communities have had. And a lot of them also don't have the infrastructure that what I call residential equality that they should. On Hilton Head, within the last 5 years, the majority of people didn't have sewer connections. Within the last 5 years, a lot of them didn't have fire hydrant hookups close to their homes. Take Sapelo. There's no medical doctors on the island. There's so many different pockets of communities where residentially there is no equality that they have. I mean, if you live in a plantation on the island, sure, there are fire hydrants, there's drainage, there's all of these things. There's sewer hookups, all of that comes with the new development. A lot of the communities were just left behind and still are left behind today.
I feel like before you said it earlier, Hilton Head didn't even connect with me in terms of Gullah Geechee populations and areas.
And there are only 3 indigenous cultures in the United States. Native Americans, there's the Hawaiians, and then there's the Gullah Geechee. There are ways that protecting the land, like on Hilton Head, they're looking to do historic overlay districts so that you know that you're in, a particular area and there are specific rules to that area. If you drive around Hilton Head, there are historic neighborhood signs, so you know all of the Gullah neighborhoods and they're identified. There are other places that have been doing that, like in St. Helena. They have specific protections on St. Helena, so developers can't come in and build a golf course, things like that. They're doing some things like that in Charleston and other communities. Are we there yet? No, absolutely not. The work and the thought process is there, but it needs to be better than where we are today. Because again, once it's gone, it's gone. You can't get the land back.
What do you think is the most surprising or unexpected thing that you've learned about your own heritage through your work with Lowcountry Gullah?
The most surprising thing was, actually, I just learned something the other day or figured it out, so I'll tell you both. The first thing was that I'm descended from enslaved people who worked on a rice plantation, and learning about rice and the importance of rice in America as one of the top crops for generations prior to the Civil War, and the issues that went along with working rice. Rice plantations were the top 2 most dangerous plantations that you could work on were rice plantations and sugarcane plantations. Those were the most dangerous. The mortality rate was the highest, infant mortality rate was highest, and the death rate was highest. Close to 10% of the enslaved would make it to 40 years old, between 40 and 50. Average lifespan was 3 years on the plantation and about 27 years old. So to me, that was a very jarring fact that I learned, that my ancestors survived that and those statistics for me and my family to be here. The other thing that I learned, and this was just the other day, I just had this aha moment. I was writing my newsletter and I was talking about names. And in the census, I have an ancestor whose name is Afi. And Afi is a Ghanaian word. It actually means Friday, because a lot of the Gullah would give either names based on the day that they were born, or if it was windy out, or if it was sunny out, or raining out, or thundering, like thundering. Those were names. And they're called basket names. But her name was Afi. And so because I figured out that her name was Afi, I now know at least one of the ancestors that I descended from that connects me directly to Africa. And that was like a totally mind-blowing. I mean, I knew I had Ghanaian in me, but now I know the individual. who was Ghanaian. And that to me was just powerful, because that was just something I never thought that I would ever know, like who was where in my either Nigerian roots or my Senegalese or my Ghanaian roots. So I have one country down. I have two more to go. I'm going to keep digging.
That's amazing. Once you said that, I had never thought about it ever. When I was a teenager, I knew a brother and sister, and we had always asked, like, why'd your parents name you this? But her name was Wednesday, and her brother's name was Yesterday, and she had a cousin named Tomorrow. And I was just like, that's different. Like, I'd never, heard that. And she explained it, that it was just like a thing that their family, that they would always do. And I just thought, okay, well, that's unique. But I'd never thought about that would be a way that a culture would name children.
And it's cool. Today, if you heard somebody named Wednesday or Tomorrow or whatever, it's kind of like, oh, well, that's kind of a weird name. But to think about the fact that culturally, that was something that Gullah people held on to and continued for generations. And it's something that they're still doing in West Africa today. Cuffy is the male version of Friday. Affy is the female version. But, there's every single day of the week, different elements and even characteristics of the child. Those were things and ways that people named you. And so that's also, it's just so traditional in how it was done.
What's one Gullah word or phrase that you think everyone should learn, and why? I know you've mentioned a few words, but is there anything in particular?
So my favorite phrase is day clean, which means kind of like the new year. It's a day clean year. It's the beginning. It's fresh. It's the sun rising and it's starting over. One way that people are starting to greet people is by saying grand rising, that you're getting up and it's a grand part of your physicalness and you're part of a great day and a clean day. And so to me, those are three different phrases and elements of the culture that I'm trying to incorporate in my daily existence, because not only is it part of my culture, but it's also traditional and a great way of saying good morning, or how are you doing? Grand rising, not just get up, grand rising. I mean, that's just a beautiful way of greeting the day. And I'm a sunrise, sunset person. So, when I think of day clean and grand rising, I think of this magnificent orange sun rising over the ocean, something just tremendously beautiful that you can capture and appreciate. And so that would be mine.
Yeah, I feel like I gotta start each day with that attitude when I'm in bed.
Yeah.
Instead of lounging around for an hour, I'll be like, I'm up.
Well, I mean, we always say have a good day, but, when you say grand rising, I mean, that's just elevates the whole thought process versus have a good day or good morning. I mean, not that, well, I don't really like saying good morning, but, to me, the grand rising just makes more sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, because also back in the day, your ancestors and, Gullah people didn't know if they would make it to the next day.
Exactly. And appreciating the day. You're here, you've made another day and you've persevered through another day. And that makes the next one a great day.
What are some myths and misconceptions that you've heard about the Gullah culture?
The biggest one, and this one is actually, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. It's one that I'm still beating myself up over. And so as a child, and based on the way I was taught about history and slavery and how enslaved people talked, I bought into the whole narrative of slaves were lazy, they were not educated, their ability to speak clear English. I mean, it's what we were taught, that it was just these people who were just there and working and enslaved. enslaved and just going through the motions. Now I know that they were highly intelligent. They were the best of the best of the best that were stolen from West Africa, that they came with skill sets. They created a language out of resistance so that they could communicate amongst themselves and talk about whoever was close by and them have no idea. They were far from everything that we have always been taught over the years. And so that has been a real polar shift for me. And I mentioned that it's something that I beat myself up over because I find that it's something that my younger self should have been embarrassed about buying into. And if I had known and really took the time to learn, because we all have to learn on our own. Screw the textbooks, screw what you're learning in high school, get a good grade if there's a kid listening, but do your own research, get the information that you can find, because you can't rely on everything that you are being taught. And that's the thing that I did. I bought into it, and shame on me for doing it. And now I'm grateful for the fact that I am doing the research on my own and learning what I can and absorbing as much as I can and changing my thinking as much as I can. Because instead of being embarrassed by someone who may not have been skilled and wearing rags and all of those things that we associate with being enslaved, to knowing that they did the best that they could with what they were given, but they were also so valuable. By the way, West African enslaved people the rice growers were more valued as a property and as an enslaved person than any other plantation in America because of the skill sets that they had. So when you think about things like that and you know that you come from incredible stock instead of bottom of the barrel stock, it gives you a whole nother perception and reality and gumption that you can put on your shoulder and move forward with.
I think that's important. I think that a lot of people go through that. I know that I went through that in terms of when you're a kid and you learn in school. But I think my mother, she always told me, whatever you learn in school is what you learn in school. But whatever you hear from me, whatever you read, whatever you look up on your own, that's where you really learn things. That's more valuable information. And you have to be able to understand that there's a difference between school and when you really do your own research.
Exactly. And, I had one of my great aunts, Auntie Helen. She always had all of these little pamphlets that, had history in it. And it looked like someone Xeroxed it in their backyard or something like that. It wasn't like a real book. But hindsight being 2020, if I had taken the time to really talk to her and absorb more, I would have known about my Gullah heritage growing up. I would have known about the history growing up. There was probably so many things that she tried to tell me and my sister and the family, and we rebuffed. But she was one of those people who was not just sitting there saying, yeah, well, that's what they told me. I mean, she was telling me there were Black presidents, when I was 9, things like that. So to me, when you have someone who's around you who knows the history and has the stories, ask them the questions. That's the biggest other thing that I'm beating myself up. I'm sorry I didn't get to ask them the questions and learn more about what they knew about our ancestors. That's probably one of my biggest regrets.
Give yourself some grace.
Well, I feel like I'm making up for it every day. And that's what fuels my work. And that's also what gives me joy, because I come across people who are interested in my work and are going through the same things that I'm going through, or curious about learning more about who we are and where we came from. And that's what fuels myself, So yes, I do give myself some grace now, but it's been a process of unwinding that regret.
What do you think is the most beautiful thing about Gullah culture that people don't know about or is often overlooked?
One of the things that I find is really beautiful about the culture is, first of all, the people are very forgiving, because a whole lot of people would have been wanting to, rebel and war and kick some butt for the treatment that they got. They're very forgiving. The ancestors wanted to buy land and pass it down because they saw the value that came out of the land. And so, but part of that was being able to help future generations sustain themselves. And so that ability to take what you have and do what you have, that to me is one of those elements. But the other element that I truly love is that the Gullah culture is based in a village mentality and on kindness. If one had, all had. There was nobody who starved in the Gullah community. If one person was a fisherman and another one was a farmer, they would share. There was no, well, I have a whole bucket full of fish and I'll sell you a couple. It was, I'll give you some fish, you give me some corn or whatever it is, and we're all in this together. The interconnectivity of the people and the reliance of we're in this community and taking care of each other, that is really real. And that to me is one of the most powerful things about the culture.
And we're talking about preserving culture here. So if you could make a box of 3 symbolic things that represent Gullah culture for future generations, kind of like a time machine, what would you put in them?
Oh my goodness. I think one of the first things that I would do, which has always been symbolic of the culture, is put in a bottle tree. And a bottle tree, for those that don't know, is something that has come out of West Africa, but enslavers used superstition against the enslaved because they didn't want them to run away. So they would make them think that there's boogeyman in the woods kind of thing. So a bottle tree would take blue bottles. Blue would be the second thing because haint blue is something that you see all over the South now on porches and ceilings and houses. It is representative of the sky and water. So they would take those blue bottles and put them on the tree to capture, it was believed, to capture evil spirits that would be caught in the bottle. And if the wind blew and you heard the whistle, then, that was to believe that there was a bad spirit in there. And the day clean of the day, the heat of the day would burn off that evil spirit. So between the color blue, haint blue, and the bottle trees, those were definitely 2 that I would put in there. And you can put other color bottles, but those are good spirits, but the blue or the bad. The other thing that I would put in there is music. The connection to music and being able to communicate through song, because a lot of enslaved people were not allowed to talk, but they were allowed to sing. And so the music was used to communicate as well as to get them through the day, to get them through the arduous things that they had to handle. And so that would be my other, those would be the 3 things that to me represent the culture the most.
And we talked about tourism a little bit and people visiting the islands and Lowcountry. But, there's positives to visiting as well because you get to see the actual culture and the locations. So are there any key towns or places to check out if someone is really interested in exploring Gullah culture?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. You can go to Savannah. Shout out to my friend Pat Gunn, who does a Gullah tour along the waterfront. And it's called the Underground Tours. And she literally takes you into these structures that enslaved people were held in on the waterfront. And by the way, those slave dungeons in Africa are identical to those. So that's someplace that you can go. There are places that you can do Gullah tours. You can do it on Hilton Head. You can do it in Charleston. You can do it, in several other places. You can go to Georgetown, South Carolina, which is where the most rice was grown, but they have a rice museum there. And a lot of different elements of the culture are in Georgetown. You can go to Charleston to see what's there. And even if you don't get to go to a particular city or something, go to a festival. There are Gullah festivals. There's probably about 20 Gullah festivals between North Carolina and Florida that you can go to experience the culture. So there are tons of them that are around. And I know that there's about 20 because I just put it on my website. So, but to me, that's the best way because you can see a ring shout. You can see people doing the ring shout, which is the music and using their bodies and the words to communicate in either an entertainment or a religious capacity. I mean, there's just so many things that you can see and experience, and there's just so much that you can do.
And what are some ways of identifying Gullah culture in one's family history?
Well, because Charleston was the largest, most active slave port in the United States, South Carolina has the most amount of enslaved people that came through here. But those enslaved people were taken to Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, you name it. 40% of Americans who can connect themselves to a descendant that is of African enslaved, they're Gullah. They're Gullah Geechee, period. That's a huge number. So chances are, and it's funny because I was having this conversation with somebody before. There are people who are, let's say, in Jamaica or Trinidad or Barbados or whatever. They call themselves Jamaican or Trinidad, Barbadian or whatever. They're all Africans. Just like in America, if you're Black, you're of African descent. And if you're African descent, and your enslaved people were here, that means that chances are just under half of Black people in America, they're Gullah Geechee. And that's a huge number. And just because your family lives in California right now, and, maybe you haven't gone back far enough to the East Coast, that doesn't mean that you're not. It just doesn't. And there are other communities there are other pockets of Gullah community because a lot of the Gullah lived among and integrated with the Native Americans. So the Trail of Tears, when the Native Americans were going west, guess what? The Gullah went west too. So there are pockets of Gullah in Oklahoma and Tulsa, in, Brackeville, Texas, in northern Mexico. So it's not just, and I have actually learned recently there was one in Phoenix. So, but there are pockets of people everywhere. It's just a question of going far enough back to connect to the coastline. But we're all in there somehow.
If you could go back in time to meet any historical Gullah person, who would it be? And what would you ask or tell them?
Wow. Let's see. My past self would have said someone like Martin Luther King or, somebody like that. My present self, actually, I can't even narrow it down to just one. Sorry. My present self would say Harriet Tubman, because I've done so much research on Harriet Tubman. Then the other one would be one of those African queens who were warriors. That would be the other one, so that I could have a fully rounded understanding of the experience from my African side and my American side.
That's awesome. What about not historical, but your ancestors? Who would you want to meet?
Okay, so my mother's family, maternal and paternal, are both Gullah. So on the maternal side, I would want to meet Catherine Ward, who is married to George, by the way. I'm not going to ignore your name, George, who is as far back as I could get in my ward line. And they are the ones who were on the rice plantation. And there's this image from Georgetown of a group of women who were on a rice barge. And every time I see, it's like 10 or 15 women who were just standing there looking like powerful and strong, don't mess with me kind of women. But every time I see that picture, I imagine that Catherine was one of them because she was in Georgetown. So she would be on my maternal side. On my paternal side, it would probably be Caesar Ravenel. He was the one who was the Union Colored Troop soldier. Those would be the two that I would want to know.
Yeah, I always like to think about what I would say to ancestors and how I would just try and have a conversation with them, what it would be like.
See, I think my biggest question would be, how did you survive? What was within you that enabled you to have the strength to survive every single day? For Catherine, backbreaking work, and for George, backbreaking work to be a part of a rice plantation. That would be my biggest question, because today we complain about stupid stuff, traffic or whatever. And, sometimes I try to remember that I don't have it bad at all compared to what they experienced and what they had to go through. And we complain about not wanting to do something or to deal with something or, just trivial stuff. But when you think of someone who was forced, they didn't have a choice. And a lot of the things that we don't think about that they had to experience, earlier we were talking about the weather, 30 degrees out here today. I have been in slave cabins that have the planks of wood are, put together, but there's no mortar or anything connecting those panels. So, and we don't think about it, but when the wind blows, guess what? It's blowing through the house. And so things like that. People who entire families had to live in a 10 by 10 shaped house. A 10 by 10 is your average room in a building right now. So imagine you have 8 or 10 people that are living in this house of 10 by 10. So when it comes to how did you do it, it just can take you into so many things that we never think about. And that is just amazing. I mean, think about it. If you don't feel well and you don't want to go to work tomorrow, you call in sick. You can't call in sick. If you have a fever or whatever it was, you can't call in sick. If you're pregnant and about to pop out a baby, guess what? You're still in the fields. Those are the kinds of things that we don't think about that they got through. You didn't get a 6-week maternity leave. You may have gotten a day, but that was just it. And to me, there's so much stressors that they experienced that you could be killed tomorrow. If you look the wrong way, you touch the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing, you sneeze the wrong way. You name it, and you could have been beaten to death that easy. And those are things you don't think about. So, you asked me for one question, that was like about 10, but it's just powerful stuff that they overcame. And it's humbling. It's really humbling. The thing that I would want to leave with people is we are miracles. And I'm saying, Black people who are descendants of enslaved people, we're miracles. And we don't give ourselves the credit to either appreciate or understand the fact that it's miraculous that we have been put in a line of people, thousands of ancestors who survived from being in Africa to the Middle Passage to being enslaved. There's so many places and points where your average person today probably would have just given up, said, I can't, I don't want to, I can't. So to think and realize and recognize the power of the miracle that we are, that's, to me, the biggest thing that people should know. And do your own research. Find your tree, do the research on your tree. Find the oldest ancestor, or not ancestor, but elder that you can find. Ask those questions and create the stories. Because when you find out who you're descended from and you can learn their story, oh my gosh, it's like peeling a curtain of the past and learning the richness of the stock that you come from. And that to me is the greatest gift that I would say I've given myself.
I've had an ancestry account for almost 20 years. So, we've been trying to learn, but my dad's side of the family is way better at it. Everybody connects. Everybody has been really interested in it for so long. And it's amazing because, when I was younger, it would, even my mother and my father, they'd be like, what can you possibly find? Slavery, we can't find anything. You have to try. You have to learn how to do the research. And then when you do, you'll be amazed as to what you can actually find.
Oh, yeah. And the stories that you could put together. You don't think about the stories. I mentioned Caesar Ravenel just because he was in the Civil War as a soldier. I can find where his troops were, the battles that he fought in, the work that he did. He was part of liberating Jacksonville.
Nice.
When the Union troops went down there. Those are the kind of stories that you can put together. And he was born in an Indian reservation on the Black River. So it's that richness kind of thing that puts all of those little details together, and they'll blow your mind. They'll just blow your mind. And then you kind of realize that you do some of the things that you do because of the things that they did. And that just makes it all that much more rich.
I mean, I've learned so much from having very little knowledge of Gullah culture. So thank you for that. Thank you for the work you're doing. And I'm glad you keep finding yourself. It seems to be like a really
rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Enlightening too.
Yeah. And like I said, little tidbits like finding Affy and connecting it to Ghana, to me, it's turned into the rest of my lifelong learning that I'm sure that there's always something that I can find and be fascinated by.
It's a good way to live.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much. We learned a lot, and it's a lot of information to share with people. And hopefully at some point we get down there and check everything out.
Yeah, you got to call me. You got to call me and I'll give you the island tour, all of the history, take you to Mitchellville and the Gullah tour and all of that good stuff. So happy to do it.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. If you're looking for more information and a deeper dive into culture, visit the website. It's lowcountrygullah.com. And there's a YouTube channel too with a lot of videos on there. So if you want to take that deep dive and learn some more, there's tons and tons of articles and information there for you.
Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you. You guys had awesome questions.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
A huge thank you to Luana for sharing her knowledge and passion for Gullah Geechee history and preservation. Her work is a powerful reminder that protecting cultural heritage isn't just about remembering the past, it's about ensuring its future. To learn more, support preservation efforts, and explore Luana's work, you can go to lowcountrygullah.com. That's lowcountrygullah.com. We'll also have a link to it in the episode show notes so you can learn more.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Bound by the Cloak. Make sure you follow us. We're on Threads, X, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, and Good Pods. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Thanks for listening.
Until then.